So I see a lot of kids, and a lot of kids have factors in their life that might impact their education. For instance, loss or trauma. So if a kid has lost a parent or a kid has witnessed a traumatic event, it's definitely going to impact their experience at school. Maybe it's going to contribute to their busy mind and make it challenging to take tests or pay attention or concentrate. So in the school system, it's not something that a lot of the schools will share very readily. But what we do here is we want to give parents all the information that they can have in order to make the best decision for their kid. So when I see a kid that has had a traumatic event or has a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD or depression, in the school system, there is what is called a 504. So we have two things. We'll start with a 504. 504. The 504 is under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's section 504. Okay? So a 504 is an accommodations plan. What is that? Well, there are certain things that we can afford the child to help them achieve their academic excellence. For instance, in a 504 plan, we can say that they need double time on their exams, or they need to be able to take their exams in a quiet room, or maybe they need like a fidget toy. For a lot of girls that I see that have, it's called trichotillomania. It's an anxiety disorder where they pull out their hair or their eyelashes or their eyebrows because of anxiety. What we do is we kind of put reverse Velcro underneath their desk so they can play with that. And that seems to help calm them down. But all of that has to be written up in a 504 plan. This is a legal binding document that the school must provide the student these opportunities. A 504 can be done at a very young age and be with a student all the way through to the end of college. I myself had a 504 plan when I was in college. And it was super cool and helped a lot because all it did was give me a sense of ease that I could use these opportunities if I needed to. If I needed to take a test in a quiet room, or if I needed to have the test read to me, I could do those things. So this is one of those things where I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. What is the requirement for a 504 plan? Well, the requirement for a 504 plan is a letter from a licensed professional. So as a licensed professional, I write these letters all the time. Once I write the letter, the school will get together, usually with me and the parent, to go over what it is that might be best to help this kid. So this can happen immediately. A lot of schools will, actually, it will happen immediately, but a lot of schools protocol, they will have what's called an SST or an SAT, right? So this stands for Student Success Team. And this is kind of an informal document or meeting. Kind of goes over what are your students' strengths, what are their areas of concern, and then what can we do. So this is kind of like a sample before this, but these things that we do in an SST can be wrapped up into a 504, and a 504 is much more legally binding. Again, this happens kind of now, right? Now. There's another plan called an IEP. What does IEP stand for? It stands for Individualized Educational Plan. And it is under the Department of Special Ed. Okay? So ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, is not a funding source. Special ed is a funding source. So the school will get more funding for a kid that has an IEP. What do you need, or what has to happen, or what is an IEP? To get an IEP, what we do, what the school does, is if the parent requests it in writing. This is not something that you can just say, hey, I want an IEP. No, you have to put your request in writing and give it to the principal and the school district. That will then prompt the school to begin the process. What is the process? Well, the school has 15 days to get their consent signed, and they have 60 days to complete their testing. Their testing, what kind of testing? What tests your students' IQ, learning style, do they have anxiety? On some degree, are they on the spectrum? So there's lots of testing, speech and language, hearing. There's a lot of testing that goes on. And at the end of the testing, you get a 20-page document about your child's learning style. And it's free, right? So why wouldn't you do this? What would be the problem? If your kid ends up qualifying for an IEP, right, there's like, I don't know how many, there's lots of qualifiers. One of them is OHI, it stands for Other Health Impaired, right? So if you get an IEP, now we're going to set up goals, objectives, dates, timelines, and your child might be eligible to do what's called RSP. RSP is a resource pullout program where your student goes out of class for a certain number of minutes in a week to meet with an RSP teacher, usually one-on-one. The RSP teacher's goal is to help fill in learning gaps. So if your student has problems with math or English, the RSP teacher has specialized programs to help your kid catch up. So it's like having Sylvan Learning Center on campus for free. Perfect. There's no stigmatizing. It's not, oh, well, that's going to look bad on my kid's record because it's special ed. Yeah, but nobody's going to know. I mean, the school's not going to promote or publicize that your kid's special ed. The special ed is a funding source for the school. It's not an identifier or a label. We're not labeling your kid special ed for the world to know. It's an advantage of having extra help that's on campus. The other thing that can be put into, so there's RSP, and then there's also ERMS, Educationally Related Mental Health Services, ERMS. So ERMS, this is not well known of, ERMS are minutes that the IEP team, so when your kid qualifies for an IEP, there is a team of professionals. That team is made up of the principal, the counselor, the teacher, the school psychologist, usually me, the parents. So there could be like 10 people on this team that make the decisions about what's going to be best for the kid. ERMS, Educationally Related Mental Health Services, are minutes that can be put into the IEP for your child to receive mental health services paid for by the school district. Oh. So you can opt for your child to go to counseling, or maybe your kid needs to see a counselor at the school a certain number of minutes a week. And all of this can be changed. The IEP is usually revisited every 3 years. It's called a triennial. So once we set up goals and objectives, then we reevaluate and do the retesting every 3 years. At any time with your IEP, the parent can call it IEP team meeting and say, well, we need to add this or we need to add that. So it's very, very flexible for the parent to kind of be in charge. Again, recognizing that this process of an IEP takes time. You probably want to get your IEP process started early on in the school year versus later on the school year. You have to remember the amount of time that takes. We can do the 504 now, right? And have these accommodations and roll it all up into an IEP after the testing's done. So what's the difference between a 504 and an IEP? Happens now, takes time. Does not include RSP, does not include ERMS. This has RSP and this has ERMS. This is much more legally binding, right? So for little kids, IEPs are great. When you get into high school, here's the thing. High school students, junior high students need to learn to advocate for themselves. They need to be the ones that say, hey, I need some extra time on my test. This can all be written up, but if your student does not advocate for themselves, nobody's going to reach out and say, hey, Johnny, you need extra time on your test. Why don't you go to the office and take it? Nobody's going to do that. In college, it's the same thing. So teaching your kids to be their own advocate. Teaching your kids to, even if it's a high school student and they're embarrassed and they don't want to tell anybody, send your teacher an email. Say, hey, by the way, I have an IEP, and can I take the test the day before the class does? Why not? So these are services, these are systems that are available in the school. And so a lot of parents will say, well, I want my kid to be tested by a psychologist. Okay, but why don't we have them tested by the school first? Because these tests are based on school standards, right? A clinical psychologist has a PhD. A school psychologist may or may not. Typically, they don't, right? So school-based standards versus a true psychologist. A true psychologist will take the IEP, will look at it, and then might add some other testing along with it. So you can have this first and then have the regular psychologist or an outside psychologist look at it and combine some other testing. All it is a roadmap for where it is that your student is and where it is we're trying to get them. So it's a great, great resource, a great, great tool. So instead of your kid being on medication straight away, we might want to do an IEP. We might want to look at, well, what is really going on behind the scenes? I think it's a great opportunity. I like this, and again, for me, having a 504 in college was awesome. It really helped me. I did not know. In college, the 504 is usually managed, it's called the DSPS office. That's the Disabled Students Program. So the DSPS office is available on every college campus. So all I do is write my letter, student takes it to the DSPS director, and we sit down and develop a plan of how it is what they need to have in order to be successful in college. Always available. So great resources. Keep that in mind when you're working with your school at the beginning of the school year. Don't wait. Waiting until the first of the quarter might be too late, because then the testing is probably not going to get done until spring, and then we have lost a whole school year. So learning these rights and learning these laws, this is actually, it's called Wright's Law, and you can look it up, but Wright's Law explains all of these things in great detail. So I hope that helps, and that is a 504 and an IEP.